the Radio Forest Podcast.
Hi, Forrest. This is Gavin from the Fab Four.
Gavin, how are you, man? Welcome.
Hey, doing well, brother. How are you?
Doing really good. You're coming to town with the Fab Four, and it's Help and all the hits. So are you guys playing the album Help in its entirety?
No, it's actually it's the soundtrack from the Help movie.
Gotcha.
We realized when we did the Meet the Beatles album that like some people are like, "What's this? Not a second time? What's that all about?" And so we realized it was good to do the songs that everyone knows from each of the concepts, you know.
And you guys, I was looking at tickets. There's not a ton of tickets left. You guys play in Idaho often enough. What do you think's the key to selling tickets? I know it's a pretty vague question, but you guys are very successful. So what do you attribute that to have repeat fans come back?
I think it shows the strength of the Beatles music and how we present it. I think there's a lot going on right now politically, and I think people like to escape from reality a little bit. And the Idaho people are just is it Idahoans? Is that the right correct?
I guess, yeah, Idahoans. That sounds right.
Everywhere we play in Idaho, it's always packed. A lot of people come and they have a great time. Usually bring their families, and they just know how to have a good time basically and rock out.
Now, let's talk about this era of the Beatles. I find it interesting around the Help time. I mean, they're starting to transition from a boy band into the later years of the Beatles that we know them. This is around the time Dylan introduces them to pot. They have LSD for the first time. So as a fan, not necessarily a performer, talk to me about this era of the Beatles in your memory and fondness for the Beatles.
Well, you're absolutely right, Forrest. It was a transitional period, and it seemed like the Beatles had a few transitional periods. They went from kind of like playing covers early on in Germany and stuff like that, and they actually got the record deal because George Martin had heard them doing cover versions from their sets over in Hamburg, and then obviously they started to do their own songs, but they were kind of like bubblegum songs in a way, like Love Me Do, Please Please Me, very kind of like just transitioning from 50s to early 60s. And then, you're right, Help was quite a good, from A Hard Day's Night, you've got like, they'd done the movie, so they already kind of stepped into doing acting, and then they were fusing the acting with the music that they were doing, almost like the first MTV music videos that they were doing, and then that's what Help was about. Help, they literally went from black and white to color, and then just paved the way to how songs should be written when that Bob Dylan influence came in with John Lennon. John Lennon's became way more introspective rather than here's a I love you, you love me. It was more like it became a lot deeper, and then that transitioned to the 66 Rubber Soul and Revolver albums where they really got into drugs, I suppose. You know what I mean? So that Help is a very kind of like poignant part in that transition of the Beatles' development.
Do you think the drugs have any important part in that transition, or do you think if you remove that, they still would have gone through it because of the time and the influences of like Bob Dylan? And the whole world started to shift into the 70s, so that this is a big shift for humanity. Do you think minus pot and LSD, you still would have had this band change that much?
I think they were a reflection of the time. Like, they were an epoch of that time. That time was changing around them. And then they were also spearheading some of that change as well, like fashion-wise. Obviously, people had found drugs at that time, and it did expand their minds. And I don't think you would have had songs like, Strawberry Fields or I Am the Walrus or any of those kind of psychedelic, Lucy in the Sky. I don't think you'd have had those songs unless they were experimenting with that. And then I think it's just kind of like a game of tennis. The Beatles, around them at that time, people were taking drugs and being introspective. They were doing it, and then other people, because they were doing it, were doing it.
Yeah.
So people were starting to kind of play this ping pong situation where they were like, okay, we're looking at the Beatles, they're doing it, and then the Beatles were looking at society and go, well, they're doing it. And I think they just developed together, and that's why there's such a nostalgia for the Beatles, because they did develop with the people and society at the time, both not only in that area, but also politically, stuff that was going on. The Vietnam War was about to start around 65. So there was a lot of unrest, civil issues that were going on in society. So all of that combined is what made the Beatles, in my opinion.
Does it make you feel closer being from the same area as opposed to, say, someone in Idaho that, maybe saw him on Ed Sullivan or, got the radio singles? Does it feel different as a performer and a fan being physically closer to where they were?
I think, yeah, because I think it does make a little bit of a difference on the perspective. Obviously, if you're from Idaho and the first time you see the Beatles, if you were around in the 60s, was the Ed Sullivan Show. So the history started in 1964, February 9th. But it didn't in England because it started in Germany in 1962, 63. So there was a couple of years before America got used to the Beatles, which, I'm from a very small town. Liverpool's only very small. And when I grew up, people would mention the Beatles, but we were almost like, not embarrassed by them, but just kind of like, oh, well, that's what they did like 10 years ago, 20 years ago. We've got Echo and the Bunnymen. We've got like, You Spin Me Right Round. Yeah. All of these new songs that were coming out by Liverpool artists that we were like, oh, yeah, the Beatles were good, but we've got some good stuff coming out now. It's only when I left England, I thought every town in the world had like a Beatles band. Like a band that had taken over the world. Yeah. And then I went to every town almost and went, hold on, the Beatles are massive. It's from such a small, they all grew up within 5 miles of each other, and just what they did, they made people who couldn't even speak English want to speak English to learn the songs, so it's just, I think the ripple effect of the Beatles we'll never fully understand. We can just stand back and just say, wow, it was all great.
What about the impact then of Oasis now that they're back? This is really cool. I saw somebody took video of Paul McCartney at the Oasis show, and Paul was filming with his cell phone. And I was like, oh my God, imagine filming another band when you're in the Beatles. So can you talk to me real quick about the impact and maybe some comparison? Because, Oasis were very cocky in a public sort of way. So can you talk about pros and cons of both bands and maybe your affinity or dislike for Oasis?
Well, I won't say I dislike Oasis. I've got loads of stories. So I grew up with Oasis were my Beatles in the 90s. So I was a teenager in the 90s, and that's when Oasis came out. I just recently saw them at the Rose Bowl a couple of weeks ago. The night that Paul McCartney was there, I was there too. I was about 100 feet away from him, but I was down on the field. I've loved Oasis since I was a kid because they, like Nirvana, like Jimi Hendrix, like these times when people pick up guitars, it's usually because they're inspired by a band. And Oasis were my band that I was like, I saw them on MTV, Noel Gallagher, and he was playing. What had happened was Liam had left him. He was drunk or whatever, or he lost his voice. And Noel sat on MTV, and that just made me go, right, I need to play guitar. Like, it literally, the light came on. And to know years later I became like a fairly successful Beatles tribute artist. My friend played drums in Oasis. His name's Chris Sharrock. So Chris, when Noel Gallagher's High Flying Birds were playing at the Orpheum in LA, Chris said, do you want to come down? I said, yeah. So I get backstage and I meet Noel. So I'm like, all right, Noel, how's it going? And he's frowning because he's a very
You say no more.
He's like my brother. Yeah, he's like miserable looking in a way, but he's still a cool guy, But you're like, oh, and he shook my hand. He went, yeah, and then we started talking about the Beatles, and his face lit up. But for me, that was almost full circle in my life to watch someone who played guitar in Oasis and then get to meet the guy. And I never said to him, hey, man, I played guitar because of you. I didn't fan. I just ended up going, right, mate. And he'd thrown a pick and it hit me in the face. So I gave the pick back. I said, here's the pick. And then I said, it's really light. Don't you want a heavier one? So I gave him one of mine. He said, yeah, I might use that. So his pick is in the box of picks that I've got. I know which one it is because it's the most papery, thin pick that I've got in there. But so it must have been full circle for Noel in his life. He came to LA. They did a terrible show at the Whiskey or the Viper Rooms or wherever they played in LA, and they were all high on drugs or whatever, and they got the set list wrong. To come back, 20 years later, 30 years later, and sell out the Rose Bowl 2 nights in a row and play in Mexico and all over and Chicago and sell out. What a great story! And then the cherry on the top is that the person that he listened to when he was a kid that inspired him to do music is now at his show filming him. So it's just it's these kind of like little confirmations that what you did was right, in a way, like your decisions were right. And so mine is a lesser story, but it's still important in my life to have spoke to Noel and, to have in a way said, thanks very much for what you do, and I'm sure Noel and Paul have spoken to each other. I'm sure they hung out probably after that show. And that just gives Noel that confirmation that the decisions he made and the songs he wrote were actually, they meant something to someone. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. How long do you think this will last? Because, I mean, it's the Gallagher brothers, so the wheels have to come off, right? I mean, it can't ever be so good that there'll be no problems, because at their height, that you could argue they had more success than they'll ever have again. So it's like, if it's not the same now, do you think it's a safe bet that eventually they're going to hate each other and start arguing in the press again and then cancel some shows? I kind of hope so, because that's the lore, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, there's two things at play. I have a brother, and he thinks he's a rock star, and I actually do perform all over the world, but he doesn't. He's a police officer. But if we're in the room, people will point to our Andrew and say, oh, he's the rock star out of the two of them, because I'm quieter, and he's more like Noel. He's actually he's a bit more like Liam.
Yeah.
He's a little bit more outspoken, and he's just like, hey, what are you doing? And he pulls people up on stuff. I'm like, dude, so our Andrew's a little bit more like Liam, and I suppose a little bit more like Noel. But with maturity, even though you have that personality and that personality never changes between each other, I think there's a different stage in life where I hope. I know what you're saying. It'd be good if they just went out in a bang, like, oh, they're in front of
screw you, I hate you, I'm fighting.
Big punch fight, boo, and it was over. Like, yes, rock and roll, you know what I mean? Because you don't really want them to be in a nursing home, playing together and be like, yeah, I see what you mean. I suppose it would be that's what the Beatles wanted. And when they did Let It Be and they went on the rooftop, they had all these ideas about what they wanted to do. And it was like, let's go to like a big massive, amphitheater in Greece, or let's do this. In the end, they said, let's just go on the roof. And Ringo wanted the police to drag him off the kit. They wanted the last song to be that the police turned up. And they all just got like, the little hats would roll it everywhere, and he'd pull them off through the kit. But the problem was, they said the police had been really good to them for a long time, that they would vilify the police. People would be like, oh, the police stopped the Beatles, so they decided not to. But I think that would have been a great, last live gig for the Beatles if they just got dragged off. So I kind of agree with you. I think you've changed my mind a little bit. I think I do want them to kind of like start putting guitars through amps and things going on fire. And all.
Yeah. I'm a little disappointed now that Axl Rose is a good guy, and I'm like, I kind of want him to be an a-hole, because I can't be, and it's like, you want a rock star, and that's some of the lore of the Gallagher brothers. They don't care. They're like, you know what? Screw him. I'm not playing. Like, you could be rich and tour forever, and they're like, I don't care. And it's like, it's punk, it's rock, and it's got angst. But I mean, look at the Eagles. They're like, we'll get together when hell freezes over, and now they're keep extending the sphere because they're like, we're mature now. We don't hate anybody. It's fine.
Yeah, well, I think they come to I think they've got nothing to prove. No band, Oasis or the Eagles has nothing to prove. And the funny thing is, I have a connection with the Eagles as well, because Joe Walsh's guitar tech is my uncle.
Oh, wow.
So I have a connection to the Eagles as well. So, every time we go out, well, before Glenn passed away, I got tickets to go and see them, but we picked up a show that night, and that would have been the last chance.
Oh, wow.
I would have had a chance to see them too, but we're just busy at the same time. And they're called Eagles. That's what my uncle keeps telling me. It's not the Eagles. They're not called the Eagles.
It's just Eagle. Yeah, you're right.
It's just hard to say in a sentence. You know what I mean? I'm going to see Eagles tonight. And they're like, what?
It sounds weird. Yeah, it's true.
So we're always having that thing. But I think what they've done, Eagles, they're pushing the boundaries as far as like using technology, because they never were a band that ran around the stage like Freddie Mercury anyway, or the Struts. The Struts are like he's like a young Freddie Mercury. Do you know what I mean?
Like a Mick Jagger, style.
Yeah, like a Jagger. Mick Jagger. That kind of like, I'm running around and I'm the entity. You don't even need any screens.
No.
But with Eagles and also Oasis, you have like this big, great screen behind them that kind of unites them, where they're not moving that much. Behind them is like the story visually, so you're kind of entertained by that, and I think that's what the Eagles. I'm going to call them the Eagles. My uncle will probably ring me up after this interview, be like, "It's not the Eagles.
It's not the Eagles. You got the wrong band." Yeah, yeah.
But they have the Sphere, so I mean, the Sphere is now this new. Even if you're an audience member, it's like that with us with the Beatles too. Like if you were around, it's just basically a trip down memory lane with some new technologies now with us. With in-ear monitors and stuff, we can hear each other better than the Beatles could, and isn't that high-pitched female scream that's getting in the way of the music? You know what I mean? I can't hear them. So now technology is like we can be, as the 90,000-seater arenas will tell you, we're loud. Musicians are louder than the audience now. We've got that technology which the Beatles didn't have. So I think that's kind of like keeping these guys kind of like interesting and current, as well as that foot in with the older generations of people that saw them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you a little bit more than about your uncle working for Eagles and Joe Walsh. That's got to be, I would think that would be a tough gig. I get the impression that Joe Walsh is a guitar guy. I love watching these gear videos online where, they go through what strings are you using, what's your amp, and some guys are like, I don't know, the tech does it, what strings do we use? But I feel like Joe Walsh is a guitar, a tech head, a guitar nut, and he knows everything that he wants. So, instead of him like directing, Joe Walsh is going to want this. He's going to be like, no, do it this way, or I could just do it myself. Have you heard, how's his experience working for Joe Walsh? He's like he's a guitar guy, right?
Right. Yeah, I know what you're saying. It's like a motorhead, someone who's, I'm going to fix your engine. No, I know how to do it myself. Do you know what I mean?
Perfect.
Joe's been with Mark for decades. So Mark already knows how he says. So Mark's a great guitarist in his own right too. Like he was one of the main Cleveland like musicians back then. Anytime I worked with anyone like Peter Noon and I said, "Oh yeah, I live in Cleveland," they'd say, "Oh, do you know a guy called Mark?" I said, "Yeah, it's basically my wife's uncle. So he's my uncle." Do you know what I mean? So it's like, oh yeah. So my wife's from Cleveland. So any musicians that came out of Cleveland, they said, "You know Mark?" I'm like, "Yeah, he's basically my uncle," and they'd be like, "Okay." He was a great musician in his own right, still is. But when he works with Joe, obviously early on, he was a guitar tech with him, and then they became friends. He was the only when Ringo got married, obviously to Joe Walsh's wife.
Yeah, their brother-in-laws or whatever. Yeah.
They're connected. Well, Mark got the +1. Mark was invited by Joe, so he went to the wedding because they're good friends, but he knows instinctively how his guitar needs to be set up. And so when the Eagles come, said the Eagles again, I'm in trouble.
You have to, though. It's like you can't say the Guns N' Roses, right? Or Guns N' Roses is. I get it. Yeah.
Guns N' the Facebook, which is what it was going to be called.
Yeah.
You got 4 or 5 guys in a band, and whereas I've seen that Liam and Noel actually jump in the same car and kind of hang out, Eagles don't do that. So the reason why it's working right now is
they go their own way. Yeah.
Yeah, they literally get in their own limo. They don't even see each other until they're walking on stage, really, and then they do the show. And they're such good musicians that they don't even need to basically rehearse. They know the songs. And so Joe is always in the car with Mark. So Mark's always is a good friend with him and knows instinct. So Mark's job is just to look after Joe. He sees Joe, if he sees there's a problem, he's got a guitar ready to go. And it's almost like if you're in a band with people, you start to get like, it's not psychic. You just kind of can tell from body language if something's wrong or if we're going to go to the end of the song. And that's the relationship between Mark and Joe. They just look at it, he looks at him and goes, oh, something's wrong. And that's what you need. You're only one human. You can't solve all the problems when the problem goes wrong on stage. You need that other person that thinks like you. And I think that's why they're such good mates, because you do need, sometimes I'm on stage and I'm playing, I'm like, oh no, the string snapped, but the other guitar is out on stage, right, but it's still in the case, but it hasn't been tuned up. It'd be nice to psychically tell a stage hand,
that ready.
Hey, yeah, get that guitar out, make sure this, get a G string ready. No, not the knickers, but a G string to put on there.
Yeah. Does Joe, is he a pretty, I know someone like Joe Perry, I imagine it's hard to be a tech for the Aerosmith because Joe has so many guitars. I think the tech is like, I don't know what he's going to want. Like, he doesn't just travel with 4 guitars and he's like, whatever, they're all the same. Sure, some are tuned different for different songs. Any idea how Joe Walsh rolls guitar-wise? Well, he might change his mind. Now, obviously, your uncle's been with him, so he's figured out what that looks like. Do you have any insight on how many guitars Joe might throw into the mix? Because clearly he's notorious for the Les Paul, but I'm sure he's got a collection. He might get a wild hair and go like, "Oh, I want to play the SG or whatever."
Yeah, I'm sure he has. I'm sure he has one. I wouldn't actually know the answer to it. I mean, I went to see Creedence Clearwater and John Fogerty. I called him Fogerty growing up because
yeah.
English.
You don't
like
have the
Fogerty,
you don't have the YouTube. You don't have YouTube. You don't know. Yeah, you don't know how it's pronounced.
Yeah, I didn't know. And I was like, "Hey, do you guys know Fogerty?" And they're like, "Who?" Foghat? I'm like, "No." So Fogerty, John Fogerty. When I went to see him, he had like 100 guitars. Like, he pulled one out for each song and said, "Right, I did Running Through the Jungle or whatever on this little tiny Rickenbacker, and then blah 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 blah." I think Joe. Every time I've seen Joe Walsh myself, I've seen him playing like the same Strat.
Oh, okay.
So a lot of times you have loads. It's like that meme, I've just bought another guitar and my wife is asking, "Oh, are you going to get rid of the other one?" And you're like,
doesn't work that way. Yeah,
it never works that way. This one's different to the other ones, So
yeah.
I think it's funny because I think he's quite loyal in the experience that I've seen in some of the YouTube clips, and he's played with Danny Harrison, George's son, on events and stuff like that. They're all friends. I've always seen him kind of with the same Strat. And I don't know whether I just got lucky that every time I see him, he's got the same thing. But I think he's quite loyal to his favorite guitars. The thing that I would, if I was a tech guy and he said, "Right, you're going to be a tech guy for someone who's the worst person to be a tech guy just for technology purposes," I think the Edge. Have you seen how many pedals that guy's got? And then the tech guy has to like route one from another one through another one with a reverb and then a digital delay, and he has to get it right. And the Edge knows when it's wrong. He's like, "Oh, you didn't access,"
Yeah,
that would
not enough reverb there.
Job. Yeah, passing a guitar to someone that's tuned up easy to go the way he wants is probably a lot more simpler as far as like, well, I've got the 10 guitars. This one's tuned to like open D. This one's tuned to open E or whatever it is. I just have to pass them that one. But pressing all those buttons for me would be something that I wouldn't look forward to every day. Do you know what I mean? After my breakfast, I'm like, what buttons am I pressing today?
Yeah, I've heard that I know some techs do run everything like off stage. They're like, "Here comes the solo. I got to hit, here's the whammy." Or some guys are like, "I don't trust you. I'm doing it all on stage." Like, yeah, but you've got problems. We've got pedals and the pedals and the pedals. And he's like, "Trust me, I did it when I had no techs. I can do it now." That would be overwhelming for sure.
It would be. I mean, there was a show called "There May Be Noise" or "It Might Get Loud." It was a
It Might Get Loud. Oh, that was amazing.
Yeah.
That was
that's
good.
what the Edge said. He's a good musician, but he uses technology. Like he learned how to solder those pedals together to get the sound that he wanted. So he's kind of like a wizard, even though he's a great guitarist too. He's like uses that wizardry to design these shapes, that we can't get, and Brian May did it with his own guitar. He went, "I want a guitar to sound and look like this." So
he built it.
He created his own guitar. So that documentary was quite good because you have 3 people. You had Jimmy Page, and then
Jack White. Jack White.
Yeah. I would say Jack Black. That would have been a great documentary if it was just Jack Black in there too.
But Jack Black could do it. Yeah, he could do it. He could.
But it was just great because you had these 3 opposing worlds coming together. You have an Irish guy that's a technological wizard. Then you had a guy who was around in the 60s that, Jimmy Page pretended that he didn't know anything about music, and then this video surfaced up where he was about 7 or 8 years of age. "Hello, James Page," and he was a classical musician, which like went against his street cred in a lot of ways because we're like, we don't want you to have musical knowledge.
Yeah, we
want you to just be rock and roll. So he admitted to it in that documentary, and then you've also got Jack White, who's like the kind of what we'd say the pikey, the gypsy of the trio.
Yeah. It opens up with him building that guitar with all those cows around him. He's just got like a Coke bottle and an amp, a little pickup and a couple of strings. He's like, "Yeah, you can build a guitar out of anything." Yeah.
He's the MacGyver. He's the MacGyver of musicians. And then his son was helping him too. He's like, "All right, mate," and his cows mooing. And He's like, that was a documentary. But what was cool was the fusion of the three of them sitting in a room. And at first, it's funny because Jack White says, I don't use technology in any way whatsoever. I think that takes away from the musicianship. And you literally went to the Edge.
Yeah.
And the Edge is like, it's all about the technology.
Yeah, I love it.
It was great.
How impressed were you with Fogerty live? Because when I saw him, all I had in my head was the acoustic G, C, D chords of CCR, and then I didn't realize, he can shred. Like you said, he had so many guitars. I was like, stupidly, I don't know why, I didn't realize he was such a guitarist. Like, he wrote such simple songs. Like, if you want to learn how to play guitar, start with CCR. But then I was like, he was like finger tapping and shredding and playing solos. I had no idea.
Well, I think he's very skilled, and the thing is, his voice and his lyrics and his melody overtake some of the guitar parts, because the guitar parts are quite simple. Like you say, if you're going to learn how to do it, it's a good way. It's American rock and roll. It's got its roots firmly in the south of Southern America. It's got, and the soul music and the blues and all of that sort of like music is just rooted in his scales and how he sings and what he does. But you're absolutely right. That takes you by surprise, because I think he's very good. Like the Beatles made good decisions when they did recordings. If you've ever heard, like, there was this lead track on Here Comes the Sun, and it's musically great, but it doesn't fit the song. And I think that's what Fogerty's like. He knows that he can shred, but he knows the song doesn't need it. But then when you see him live, then he just reveals, by the way, he starts playing loads of stuff. You're like, this guy is a genuine, really good musician on top of everything else that he's great at.
Let me ask you, since you're the George Harrison of the Fab Four, there's a video I watch probably once a month. Once a week might be too high of an estimate, but that Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony, and I believe it's a tribute to George Harrison. You've got Danny is there, Jeff Lynne, Tom Petty, and then Prince steals the show. Surely you've seen that video, right?
Oh, that's one of the best videos I've ever seen in my life. Just the fact that he throws the guitar, and I never see where the guitar lands.
No, he throws it. Where does it go? Yeah.
I think it's still up in the air. I think it's going to land on someone in the next couple of weeks. It'll be like this. It came down.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. I think Prince, again, another underrated actual, because you see Prince and he's got that kind of like, and he's a short guy, but he's sexy and he's got all this cool stuff that he does and his music and his look and stuff, and that overrides in a way his musical ability until you actually see him play, and then you go, hold on a second, like, I thought it was just cream, get on top, I thought it was just this, singer with a high voice, but he isn't. This guy is a legitimate, real musician, and that solo, I kind of felt sorry for him, because for me, the only criticism I had of it was that the guys kept singing over, and you kept seeing them stop. Yeah. So they'd be going like, so it was the end of While My Guitar Gently Weeps, look at you all, or whatever they're singing at the end. And every time they come in, he has to stop a little bit, and you see him waiting because he's a good musician. Yeah. And then when they stop singing, he just shreds, and then he come in and sing again, and he kind of lays back and lets that breathe. And that's what makes a good musician, the decisions of what you're making and what you put in and what you don't play. A lot of people think a good musician is someone that plays all the time. No. A good musician knows when to let something else breathe. Like if something else is going on, like, okay, well, I'll just lay back. And I met a guy one time who'd worked with Pink Floyd. This was when I lived in Chicago, and he'd actually done one of the albums. He'd actually, produced it. And he said, what the best thing about Dave Gilmour is? And I was like, what? And he said, I wanted him to play for about 4 minutes, just this note with this reverb going. And he said, and he just played it for 4 minutes. And I was like, okay. He said, it's not difficult. He said, but that's what I needed to fuse this song together. And that's why Dave Gilmour's a great musician, because he doesn't have to play loads of stuff. He understands what you're trying to paint in the actual songs. And again, going back to the Beatles, it's all about making the right decisions. And I think that's what the Beatles were really good at. They had the bits of the songs. And again, we'll go back to Help so we can go full circle. Once they got back to Help, they'd already done A Hard Day's Night with the 12-string. Georgia got excited about the 12-string. Then you go to Help, and he got excited about the Tennessee Rose. He seemed to use that quite a lot in that album. And I think what was great was just those little decisions. I mean, Paul did the lead on Another Girl, and that lead is a little weird. Like, I have to learn it, even though it's not a George thing. Obviously, Paul's playing bass, but it's a very unique, weird, kind of like expressive way of playing, and it's Paul. When you hear that song, you're like, oh yeah, that's Paul, because George really doesn't play that way. But they'd made that decision. Oh, we're not going to have George play the lead. We're going to have Paul because that fits the song. And again, that's what the Beatles, that's the majesty of them, that them with George Martin made the right decisions.
Let's talk about the genius then of Ringo Starr real quick. I think a couple years back I was arguing with my dad. I'm like, oh, it's Ringo. It's nobody's favorite Beatle, and I'm not going to try to get you to say anything bad about Ringo, but I was saying something like that. My dad was like, well, yeah, but listen to this though. Ringo knew what the band needed. Like, and John and Paul were like, he's our guy because he plays what fits the song. So when you watch that. What was the documentary where they played on the roof, but the one on Apple, and you could see, Ringo smoking cigarettes and just sitting there, but he's watching for when he's needed, and he knows what those guys want to see. Can you talk about, I'll put some words out, the subtle genius of Ringo being the drummer for the Beatles?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways I can answer the question. Number one is when you're in the band, it's almost like you're in a foxhole with a couple of people, and you're stuck in the foxhole for a long time. Every now and again, you might have a skirmish, but the people that are next to you are the guys that you want to you can be in a van with for a long time. So I think personality-wise, he fit them. He had the same, similar but different sense of humor to them, which gelled them as friends. So that's one thing. You're going to be in a hurricane, you're going to be in a foxhole, whatever it is. You want to be with people that you like. Now you've got, in the band, you had arguably two, possibly three with George Harrison, best songwriters ever in it. So you've got two of the best, arguably the best songwriters ever, Lennon and McCartney. And you've also got Harrison, who wasn't that great at the beginning, but wrote the best two songs, which is John Lennon. I'm quoting John Lennon on Abbey Road. So you've got this development because he's in this. He had the spirit, but he hadn't quite developed it until later on. And then you've got Ringo. So you can't have three Kobe Bryants or three, LeBron Jameses or whatever the analogy is, or four of them. You always have to have someone that's even keeled, someone who's personality-wise sits back and says, well, let me know what to do, but then also has the chops to do what's needed in the song. And I think his drumming reflected his personality and his position in the band. He didn't go, right, let's do a drum solo until they asked. We need a drum solo on the end, so you're going to have to design something because that's what the song needs. And I think you always need that person. I think Ringo is actually that gel. I think George is the spirit, and then there's also, you've got Paul. Paul's the very shiny, Rolls-Royce exterior. This is not a musical thing. This is just a kind of like the
personality.
Yeah. Together. Yeah. And then you've got like John Lennon being the steering wheel. He's choosing where to go. The engine's run by Ringo. He's the one that's kind of gelling it all together. So I think it could be answered in many ways, but either way we could analyze it. They grew up within 5 miles of each other, and it was almost like the stars aligned. Just being in that proximity, those four guys getting together, and those four guys being able to, through whatever was happening in the world, they managed to reflect it and they managed to improve it. And just to quote Ozzy Osbourne, the late great Ozzy Osbourne, he said he got it from someone else. He said, but the Beatles was like going to bed in a black and white world and waking up and it was color.
And, one of my favorite scenes from Get Back documentary, you kind of touched on it a little bit, and I hadn't really put it into words until you voiced it that way, is so many times you focus on the great music partnership of McCartney and Lennon, right? It's McCartney and Lennon, then you've got the quiet one, and then, there's Ringo. I loved in that documentary when no one else had shown up yet. I think maybe Lennon was late. It's starting to fragment inside the band. And it's just Ringo and Harrison. And Ringo is like, oh, yeah, I kind of wrote a silly little song. And then you could see it hit Harrison. He stops, looks at him, and then helps him write Octopus's Garden. And I was like, that was so touching that I didn't anticipate to see those two without those A personalities of Lennon and McCartney. Like Harrison helping Ringo write a song. It made me so happy for the Beatles, and I don't really know why.
I think it's because you saw a little unveiling of the relationship between them. It's a lot of times you lean on your friends when things are tough, and you think that you're having an argument with them, and the next thing, there's a famous story where John Lennon's having an argument with Paul, and then he lifts up his sunglasses. John lifts up his sunglasses and goes, "It's only me." And I always thought that was kind of a good story. It's basically like they were friends. I mean, other things come into your life. I mean, this is why we can relate to the Beatles, because it happens in our own lives. You have a group of mates, and then you fragment a little bit, like you have your own life, you have your own kids and stuff like that. I think deep down they were still really good friends. And I think if John hadn't have been taken away in such a brutal manner, ahead of time, he's 40, and that's 7 years ago for me, or he's 7 years older than John even got to. But I think, like Oasis, I think they'd probably have got, once time had passed a little bit, I think they'd have gone, "Do you want to just do," They probably would have rung up and been like, "Hey." And I think that moment that you're talking about is kind of like that little, it's happy moment, but it's also a little bit of sadness in it, because it's like we never got the opportunity. We know when we see these videos what the end is for John. And that always gives us a little bit of sadness, because he was such a good guy in a lot of ways. He cheated on his wife and he ended up with Yoko Ono. That's what he wanted to do, and he had a kid and it was fruitful. So that's what was supposed to happen. You know what I mean? He got married young. And again, Cynthia, beautiful lady too, and they had a kid. So you can't predict what someone's going to do in their life to be happy. But the magic of the Beatles started with friendship, and then ended up, they just said to everyone else, hey, they went on a journey, and they sung about every emotion that you've had in your life. If you're jealous of someone, you've got "I Don't Want to Spoil the Party." If you're upset or you miss someone, you've got "In My Life." It doesn't matter. Tell me an emotion, and I'll tell you a Beatles song that will reflect that emotion. And that's what they did. And they touched on every human emotion I can think of. Do you know what I mean? So yeah. I think it's just a Bible in its own way. It's its own Bible. And I don't want to get like, oh no, stamp out the Fab Four. He said it's the Bible. No, I just mean that story is basically the story of life. And if you want to know about life and you want to feel happy and sad and upset and, nostalgic, you read the Beatles book, which is basically listen to all their music and listen to all the songs. And, in a world of distractions, it's hard now. I mean, I got my son into vinyl, and he's got a great music heritage already. He has the Lars, he has the Stone Roses, he has Oasis, he has Manic Street Preachers, he has all these bands, Ocean Colour Scene, all these great bands, Stereophonics is another one. So all these bands from the 90s that I grew up with, he's already bought the vinyls with his own money, going to the record store and flicking through and getting these albums and stuff like that, and he's got Creedence Clearwater, Nirvana, he's got all these things, and I'm like, there is hope. Yeah. There's hope for the next generation. Do you know what I mean? If they find that music and we can get off just like being distracted from each other, then maybe it'll turn around again like it did in the 90s, like it did in the 70s, like it did in the 60s. All these generations of new music that comes out where people are like, hold on, stuff's not right now, and I want to sing about it and talk to the other people. Do you know what I mean? So,
what you get him into the Verve? I didn't know this until recently. How big of a fan Oasis was of the Verve? They're like, no, without them, there wouldn't be any of that Brit pop era. They were the first ones to really have, and it wasn't just the songs; it was the style. It was that area has its own, hair and clothes, just like the southern part of the U.S., but they really were like, no, these are the first guys. These are the originators. Without them, there'd be no Oasis. I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, I think it went Stone Roses, then the Verve. Obviously the Stone Roses were a Manchester band, so you have that attitude, like the Ian Brown, I'm walking down the road and no one's going to touch me, man. That kind of like rock and roll. Even when if Liam Gallagher wasn't Liam Gallagher in Oasis, he'd still be Liam Gallagher.
I know what you mean. Yeah, he'd still be walking down the street and pushing people. Yeah.
He'd be selling, a trout at the fish market and still be, you want the trout or not? He'd probably
get into a fight. Yeah, that's true.
And that's his personality, so he's always going to be that way. But I think you're right. I think what happened was the Verve came along, and the Verve were on the back of the Lars. So if you haven't seen, the Lars were a Liverpool band, and actually, ironically enough, the guy who played bass, Powers, he's actually the lead singer of a band called Cast, which actually, they were the guys who opened up for Oasis when he played in the States. So you got the bass player from the Lars. The famous song from the Lars is "There She Goes." There she goes.
Oh,
so
yeah.
like
More of a pop song? Yeah.
Yeah. but the other songs on the album are great. It's really good. So I mean, you'll probably go and have a little listen, but it's really good. And that was kind of around the same time as the Verve, so that influenced Oasis, and they ended up playing in Lark Lane, where the Lars are from. So that's they played. They wrote Supersonic when they were playing at the it's called the Pink Museum. It ended up being the Motor Museum, and they went to have a drink. And one of the guys from another band, like gin and tonic, and he'd never had it before. They were like, "What's gin and tonic?" And they were like, "Oh yeah, okay." So the guy had blagged them. I'd heard that it was a Beatles drink, which is wrong because that's whiskey and coke. I know my drinks. So this guy had convinced them it's gin and tonic. So they went back and wrote Supersonic. Like, so from that. So to go back to the Verve, Richard Ashcroft, I got to see him in 2009, I think it was, when I lived in. We had a show in Vegas at the Planet Hollywood. So we were there for a couple of years, about 6 years. And the Verve were coming into town. And a mate of mine got tickets. So I went out there. And then obviously they did Lucky Man, which is a great song. And that album, Urban Hymns, is one of the best albums I've ever heard in my life. You know, and that lead guitarist never plays the same solo twice. He's definitely not a tribute artist. He plays what he feels. So,
wow.
But Richard Ashcroft was great. He came up and he said, you know, it's not every day that you write a hit song, but here's the one that I contributed. And then he did Bittersweet Symphony, you know. And they've only just got the money back.
Yeah, I heard that the once their manager of the Stones died, Keith and Mick were like, yeah, let's go ahead and give it to him.
Yeah, I don't think they were aware of it. I think what happened was someone must have shown them, because they were like, well, we've got our hands tied, we'll just have to wait. And then they managed to get the rights back, because that's what music is. I mean, you can't take... It was actually not even... it was called The Last Time, but it wasn't even the record.
No, it was like it was like a symphony version of it, right? Like a cover of the Rolling Stones.
Yep. This guy had put together an orchestral version of the album, whatever album it was, by the Stones, and had done The Last Time. And I don't even think it had that riff. I think it had the down, 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 down.
Yeah, it's not even. I mean, it's clearly the same. Yeah, I'm on board. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like one of the tracks is taken from it with a little bit of the orchestra, but then they added bits to it, and obviously they wrote their melodies and stuff like that for it, and then they turned it into something that it wasn't. You know, it's not like I know Vanilla Ice took the bass line from Queen,
yeah.
but he did produce something.
Oh,
new.
I added a hi-hat, yeah. Yeah.
He added a hi-hat, but I mean the rapping part of it and stuff. And so, but the problem he had was that he took it straight from the record. I don't know if the Verve actually. I don't think they took it straight from the record. I think they had it re-recorded, and so it was like it wasn't. If you put it through the artificial intelligence, I don't think the bots would have said, "Oh, it's exact." I think they'd have gone, yeah, it's a new recreation. It's different sound waves are coming out slightly, whatever the new technology is for certain people. But to go back, the Stones stole from people.
Oh, Muddy Waters, yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, they all took from, let's say, influence from other people. The influence of the Beatles, they took all. They loved Elvis, and and again going back to the blues and the soul music of the Deep South in America, they listened to that. And then what happens is you listen to it and you're influenced by it, and then you write a song, and then eventually someone says, oh, it's too close to that song, so we're going to take money. But that's not the way that music develops. You usually do take something. You take a little bit or a homage of something, Jimi Hendrix riff, and you put it in your thing, and then it's 95% yours, but you might get sued for the 5% that isn't, which is unfortunate in a lot of ways.
Last question. Sorry to keep you on so long. I'm just having such a good chat. Did you happen to see the video? You had mentioned Ozzy before. Did you happen to see the video of the first time Ozzy met McCartney? And it was way later in their lives than I thought. I thought for sure they would have bumped into each other. Ozzy is such a fan. He's so nervous. He's like, I mean, he's stuttering, but I mean, that's Ozzy at his core. But he's just like, if it wasn't for you guys, I wouldn't have done any of this. It's so weird to see McCartney be the rock star to Ozzy. And Ozzy was like just that little kid just fanning over him, and they had never met before. I had no idea that was such a touching video. I don't know if you'd seen that.
Yeah, it was on so there's a radio host over in LA with the deep voice. What's his name? He's got and he's, it was a radio DJ podcast thing. What's the guy's name? He's on on like The Voice or America's Got Talent. Or,
Simon Cowell?
No, he's the radio guy.
He's a radio
Real
guy.
Tall, deep voice. Like he did a movie about his own life. But anyway, he was on his show and he was coming on next. That was what was happening.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
Ozzy went, well, I'm gonna stay. And it was really nice meeting because Paul just goes, here he is, hello, darling.
Yeah.
It was like,
Yeah.
we've never met before.
Yeah.
But Ozzy wanted to make sure that he knew, hey, by the way, I know we're here and we're coming in, talking to each other, and I've just been interviewed. And this is what I take from it. And he just says, hey, man, I've listened to you my whole life. It's just a very touching moment because when the Beatles did the Love Show and they interviewed Paul, he said to him, what do you think of all these songs? And he goes, it's so big. When we wrote it in John's, and Mimi's, vestibule, we were sitting there and it was just me and him on an acoustic guitar. Like the songs were small. They didn't become what they became until later. When we write songs, it's just me on a piano or a guitar and John on the guitar, and we just sit each other. Obviously, Paul's left-handed, John's right-handed, so they're almost mirror imaging each other writing the songs. And then the next thing, it goes out into the world and it becomes what it is. That's probably what Ozzy was like listening to the Beatles. Is him in this kind of room on his own with his little vinyl records, dreaming about being big or dreaming about what he's going to do with his life because no one knows.
Getting out of Birmingham, yeah.
Getting out of Birmingham, yeah, that's the main thing. It's like that. Most people do get out of these small towns. You know what I mean? Liverpool's the same. I love Liverpool and I love Birmingham, but sometimes it's good to get out because there's a bigger world. And I think once you are that big, like Ozzy Osbourne was, like the Beatles certainly, Oasis, you really can't go back to that town and live. You have to kind of now live somewhere where there's walls and protection. Do you know what I mean?
Sure, yeah.
People, George Harrison got attacked, and he lived in almost like a Fort Knox, but the guy got over.
Oh,
and,
yeah, it's just a scary story.
Michael Abrams, I think his name was. But anyway, I'm digressing slightly. I think it's just being in a situation where it's you and your thoughts and you have these ideas and you develop your spirit. You want to give thanks to the thing or the entity that gave you that, and that's what happens. We're talking about full circles. I did it with Noel did it with Paul, obviously Ozzy Osbourne did it with Paul too. He just said, hey man, I could stop, I could be cool, oh yeah, I'm just as good as, but he isn't. The thing I liked about Ozzy was he was always honest, and the thing I like about Liam is he's honest, and the thing I like about John Lennon is he's honest. These guys that we somehow get rid of are the ones that are actually telling us or telling everyone what we're really thinking. I feel trapped. I feel depressed. I feel like we should all be getting along. We're all the same. We bleed. We all bleed red, and that's what these guys did. And for some reason, people get rid of them. I don't know why. And then everything else is just what it is right now. There's a lot of disruption and stuff, and that's what's great about music because it takes us. You just know it's the truth when they speak. And that's why you go, yeah. You always find yourself on any of those interviews saying, yeah, all the way through. Yeah. Well, it's John Lennon's talking about foreign wars, and he's like, it's just some mad thing that some guy wants to get us involved in, and it's just crazy. And you're like, yep.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's what they are. We need rock stars now more than any time ever in the history of humanity because they're the guys that tell us the truth. Because they've got nothing to lose. They just tell us, except their lives, but they just turn around and say, this is the way it is. And you go, yep, it's undeniable.
I remembered who it was. It was Howard Stern. They were doing the Howard Stern interview. Yeah. Now I remember. Yeah, he was on The Voice. That threw me off. I was like, The Voice? Yeah, I think he was a judge on The Voice there.
I've done interviews before, and I go, that radio DJ, and it's almost like a test. For the
yeah,
DJ I'm talking to,
caught me off guard. Yeah. Well, it's Gavin Pring. He plays George Harrison for the Fab Four tribute to the Beatles. It's Help and the Hits coming here to Idaho Friday, October 24th. Gavin, hey man, it's been great to chat with you today, and I can't wait to see you here in Idaho.
It's absolute. I've had an absolute pleasure. Usually these things are 10 minutes, but I've had a really good time talking to you, and it's just funny that you've touched on a lot of things that I could actually talk about. Imagine if you said, what's it like mining in Blackpool? I'd be like, I've never mined.
Yeah.
Listen, I've had a real pleasure today. This has been a fantastic, one of the best interviews I've ever had, and hopefully we see you on the is it 24th?
Yeah, the 24th. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, hopefully you and the other rockin' Idahoans. I'd love to see you guys down there. And thanks for this morning. I've had a great time. Now I'm going to have a cup of tea.
All right, excellent. We'll talk to you later. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Forrest.